Hey everyone, we're going to do a little summary here real quick before we move on to the next topic, which will be called meiosis. We're going to finish up our conversation on mitosis. And just to finalize this, we want to talk about two things. Number one is why. Why mitosis? And if you remember right, we talked about mitosis occurring in a eukaryotic cell. And again, review, eukaryotic cells are cells that have a membrane around their nucleus and other organelles. So most more complicated animals or organisms, we are eukaryotic cell or organisms with eukaryotic cells. So the three main reasons for our purposes of why mitosis happens are right here. The first one we talked about in the first section of this chapter was that cells get too large. And we did a lot of explanations on that. We did the math, talked about surface area and volume ratios. And basically what we said was that a cell likes to have a small volume inside compared to its surface area outside. So this cell here, or maybe even a little bit smaller cell, would be happy because it has very little distance to travel, very little volume to go through for the nucleus to send information throughout the cell. So it'd be kind of like we talked about a classroom of 25 students in a smaller size room would be easier for me to communicate information to you, whereas trying to teach a class of 25 in the auditorium would be a little more difficult because there'd be a lot more area to cover for passing out papers and getting information to you. So cells like to be small. As the cell gets bigger, as this one does, we talked about how the volume increases faster than surface area does because you're cubing that, and so this becomes a problem. All right, so a cell doesn't tend to get large like this, and we said that an organism that's larger doesn't necessarily have larger cells for the most part. It just has more standard size cells. So the first part, why mitosis, cells get too large, and so the other option is to divide, and that's what they do. Also, we talked about how cells will need to replace old or worn out cells. So for example, our skin cells, as we lose skin cells, we need to replace them. And then finally, the third one we haven't talked about as much, and we will hit a little bit more, especially in the next section, is differentiation. And differentiation just basically means creating more variety. And obviously, you're not just made of one type of cell. We're made of skin cells, we're made of muscle cells, we're made of nerve cells. So these cells need to divide and turn into other types of cells. And that starts with another topic we've mentioned, and we're going to hit more, is stem cells. All right, and stem cells are essentially, and it's a little more complicated than this, but stem cells are blank cells that can be turned into a variety of different cells. So once we start to head down a road, it's kind of like coming to a fork in the road. You hit that fork in the road and you can either go left or you can go right, depending on which way you go. If you go left, you might say turn into muscle and skin cells. Or if you go right, you might turn into nerve cells or something like that. So it's just a way for cells to become varied, to differentiate. Okay, so that pretty much covers, and there are more reasons, but for us in terms of this class, why mitosis, it's cells get too large, they need to divide, they need to replace older worn out cells and to become differentiated. Okay, now in this particular video we're not going to cover the steps of mitosis, we've done that already, but the next topic that we need to sort of end on is what is the result. All right, now obviously the result that we have talked about, and is pretty obvious, is that you end up with more cells. All right, so that's, I think, self-explanatory. All right, mitosis is a division cycle in the life of a cell. So you divide and you make another cell. But more specifically, and there's going to be a little more here, more specifically, what results is this. And there's a lot of information here, so let's just look at one thing at a time. The first one, the most basic one, is that you end up with an exact copy of the original cell. So if we start out with this cell here, and it goes through all the steps of mitosis, all right, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, and then the next step, which is not part of mitosis, but is the final action, is cytokinesis, and that is where it splits. So we're gonna kind of fast forward, and we're going to skip ahead here, but what we did is we went through mitosis, so now we've got something that looks sort of like this, all right, and then it ends up splitting, and now we have two. All right, now this, let me try and make it almost exact here as best I can. mitosis ends up with something like this. And in humans, a cell that had 23 pairs of chromosomes, remember we have pairs of chromosomes because we get one from mom and one from dad. In humans we have 46 total chromosomes, but really we have 23 pairs. 2 number 1 chromosomes, 2 number 2s, and so on. And what we end up with is a cell with the same exact thing, 23 pairs of chromosomes, or 46 total. All right. Now a new term that we haven't talked about as much yet is this one right here, and it's called diploid. What that means, and if you think about it right here, you think the prefix di means 2. All right. So in a diploid cell, and this is a new term for some, a diploid cell is a cell that has 2 of every chromosome, which is exactly what it says here in number 2, guys. So don't get too confused by that word. It's just another way of saying exactly what I said in number 2, but it's shorter. All right. Diploid cells are cells that have 2 of every chromosome. So that is a diploid cell. So we started with a diploid cell, and we end with a diploid cell. Now, the final thing that we need to focus on here is how do we show that? And it's going to be really important in the next topic when we start talking about meiosis, or how we create our sex cells or our gametes, our sperm and egg. We use the symbol 2n, all right, where it means 2 times the number of chromosomes. Now, if you think about some of your math, if you know in your algebra classes, and you have letters that mean numbers, so variables, n would be the number of chromosomes. Okay, so if you have 2 times that, that means you have 2 times the number. Well, in humans we have 23 chromosomes, but if you have 2 times 23, 2 times 23 equals 46, and that's pretty basic math, but that's what that means. So in the future, when we talk about diploid or 2n or anything like that, it basically means that you have 2 of every chromosome, or a total of 46 for humans, 2 times 23. So that's pretty much it. That's the summary of mitosis, and obviously we didn't in this video mention the phases and what happens in the phases, but I did want to remind you here of one more thing, and that's this. If this is a chromosome, this is what it would look like during most of the life cycle of a cell, all right, during the G1 phase, but then we hit that S phase, and that is when the DNA inside the cell, inside the nucleus, copies itself. And so you end up with a chromosome that looks a little bit more like this, all right, something like this. Now, a lot of times in the pictures you'll see them, they'll be more of an X shape, like this, you know, something along those lines. If I were to draw it here, it would look something, you know, like this, and then it looks something like that. It's just because they're twisted, and then you have that thing in the middle called the centromere that holds them together. All right, that is still one chromosome, but it has been copied, and then again in the other video we showed that these are called sister chromatids. All right, so that's the summary. We'll talk more about this later on, but the next topic is going to be meiosis, and we will hit that next class. So I hope this has kind of cleared things up and let you know what is important and what we've been trying to get out of all these talks about mitosis and cell growth.